Today we're talking about Cardano. Cardano has, ever since I think its inception, been high in the rank of overall cryptocurrencies. So I think it's always been top 100 for a very long time. It's been top 10. Very recently, I think it might have fallen just slightly, and I think we've discussed this on the show, where it really hasn't fallen out of the top 10. I think it's 11 or whatever. To me, that's in the statistical noise. So Cardano's been around for a super long time. 2015, in my recollection, is when they first started thinking about it. 2017, it launched. So it's undergone a lot of changes over the years. And very recently, we've got Cardano ready to hard fork again to some new capabilities. And I think if you were to put this in the parlance of what's been happening with other chains, this would be what's called a community takeover, I think. So we'll be talking with developers who have been working for quite a long time in the Cardano space. One other interesting thing about what's happening with Cardano is the founder, or one of the main programmers who started in ETH, Charles Hoskinson. They were speculating that he was dead, and I think we can dispel that notion right now, because I saw a post from his account just a little while ago, I think 13 hours or something ago. He posted, "I'm not dead. I'm in Mount Denali." So Charles Hoskins' death is greatly exaggerated. But we'll be talking about some Cardano stuff here this morning. Lucas, I know you're a big Cardano fan. You're the one who is pushing for us to take a look at this. What's your take on Cardano these days?
Well, I very glad to see in that tweet a Mark Twain line. We can't have enough Mark Twain lines, by the way. Reports of my death are greatly exaggerated. Either this wallpaper goes or I do. Maybe we'll throw some. Anyway, I've been interested in Cardano for quite some time. I took a long break and from blockchains, but when I came back in, Cardano had already been launched. I sort of left around a couple of months or years after the launch of ETH, and when I saw that Charlie Hoskinson had started his own project, Cardano was taking a lot of FUD from people who had entered crypto with an expectation, something more along the lines of Bitcoin and a base layer token increasing in value. But I knew that, or I had a suspicion that Charlie was looking to solve more issues. He's brilliant. He's politically savvy, and I think I've always thought he was very motivated by bringing value to the world, and to just sort of his vision is what enthralled me. And so when I started digging into Cardano, I was impressed with the rigor, the academic rigor, the associations with universities, the sort of the Wisconsin idea and model of bringing a technological solution to political problems. In that regard, there's a lot of proof of work maxis who were turned off by proof of stake. I've long thought that proof of work and proof of stake are on some sort of continuum, and that consensus security is what should be considered overall. So there's all that. There's other aspects that I really enjoy about it. I'm not a mathematician by trade, and I run into all of these names like ADA and I don't know, Alonzo Church. All these various names in Cardano I also find brilliant, because it's sometimes when I am tired of the usual rabbit holes that I run down in the blockchain crypto sphere, I just look up something on Cardano and I'm like, what's this strange word? And then I go look it up on Wikipedia and disappear for a couple of hours. So that's sort of why I've been interested in Cardano.
Well, luckily we've got Rob with us today. So, Rob, I don't know if you want to take a minute to introduce yourself. So, you've been developing and working with Cardano for quite some time. I know when we first crossed paths, and it's always fun when you go to some sort of a blockchain event and you see another developer. It's rarer than you might think, and when two developers get together, it's a very much a meeting of the minds because you're like, oh wow, it's somebody else who programs in blockchain, not just is in for the marketing or in for the number go up or whatever, but want to
Right.
do something in blockchain. So Rob, maybe you could just introduce yourself for a second and let us know what you've been doing with
Yeah.
Cardano lately.
I mean, I remember that moment when we were at the blockchain initiative sort of thing at St. Thomas there, and Wolf Call, great guy by the way, who's a professor at St. Thomas. He wrote this book on decentralization, and we're we were listening to him talk. You and I were sitting next to each other, and you know he talked about all these problems and stuff like that. And I mean, you were thinking the same thing as me. I think, well, there's solutions for these things. Why do you agonize over this thing so much, right? I don't know. It's just a little crazy. Sometimes we definitely have trouble, um, you know, uh, with inertia. So in other words, we tend to. I think humans do it the same thing, but I don't know. I've been in this industry for not the blockchain industry per se, but probably as a developer and as a consultant and systems architect, where I just have to solve problems all the time, and so really what I'm about is solving problems. But quite some time ago, I read a book called Data and Goliath, and I kind of thought to myself, well, the old adage of if you don't pay for something, you're the product. And um, I think at the time it was, kind of a big problem that people thought about. And But it ends up being a problem where people have sort of put it aside. And so when I started considering, what sort of solutions could be, applied, how could we take ownership of our data so that we could profit from it? How could we make it so that, you know, um, how can we make it so that we can engage with the world in much more fair ways? If you look at my LinkedIn sort of thing, I have a little video that I posted some time ago about the what is going on with like lobbyists in our Congress, right? So statistically, uh, rich people, and I'm not against being rich by any stretch of the imagination, but um, I do want to build systems that remove their ability to have more effect on things like legislation, um, in the United States, of course. More effect. I want to avoid them having the ability to have more effect on legislation than than a normal person might have, right? So this is kind of the thing that got me involved in Cardano in the first place, was because of all of the blockchains that sort of existed at the time. I saw Cardano um, because of its systematic sort of scientific approach to solving problems. I thought, well, that's the thing for me, and I could perceive of these solutions, based on Cardano, that you couldn't do on other chains, right?
Well, I mean, Cardano has some differences with, I think, most people would consider how you do blockchains because we're dominated by an account model. There's only a couple of chains that really have this kind of coinset or UTXO model. It's
Yep.
like Bitcoin, Cardano, and Chia probably is the
Yeah.
ones that really come to my mind. There are probably a few more, but they're the top programmable ones, I think, right?
Right. Um, and absolutely 100%. That's right. So that UTXO model in and of itself gives us some advantage. Like Ethereum has been considering this idea of sharding for some time, right? So, but it's a really difficult solution because especially with the proof of a proof of stake sort of system. Now, with the proof of work system like they had before, it probably would have been better, but it's a really hard thing to figure out what is the most valid chain, right? So they use this thing called, whatever the longest chain rule is, right? So they use this thing to say, the longest chain is blah blah blah, and so that's the one we got to go with. But the UTXO model, in and of itself, allows you to have asynchronous transactions. And honestly, this is nothing new in the industry. Like, if you think about, I used to work in these big databases, Oracle databases. They're called racks, or real application clusters. They're just big clusters, and sometimes they're distributed over, I don't know how many systems. I worked on one that was distributed over like 200 different nodes. And in a system like that, you have these things where you have a ledger. Basically, it's kind of the same sort of thing. In fact, I would say it is the same sort of thing, where you have a ledger, which is the logs, right? And the logs are keeping track of everything, right? But they're not state machines. So these things are not state machines. They don't hold the same data. They hold different data. So at some point in time, two nodes can do different and separate transactions, and then it can eventually gets around to um, writing the transaction to the primary ledger, right? So this is something that I think a UTXO model can do better than like like the ledger sort of model, the centralized ledger sort of model, and then you know um, starting is basically the same sort of thing. But I sort of think of it like, because UTXO is like cash, like you have a $10 UTXO, you buy something, they give you a UTXO in change, $5, so that becomes the $5 UTXO that you own, and then. But what it allows you to do is to finalize a transaction, um, in such a way that the two parties who are transacting can finalize their transaction, and then the actual the actual thing that gets written to the ledger is, can be done asynchronously at some later point in time, right? So just recently, um, I was at this conference called the Rare Evo conference, where um, they played Doom with these things called Hydra heads. And Hydra heads are like a layer two sort of solution that actually does exactly what I was talking about, but in a very robust way. Um, where they were playing Doom, where every transaction, so they're doing like 35, you know, uh, uh, 35 transactions per second, because that's the frame rate of the game, and every one of those transactions was getting written, was being kept track of, right? And
Yeah,
it's
and while I was doing a little bit of prep work for the show, I actually came across this, and I found this to be
yeah,
fascinating. It's like, first off, Doom is entirely deterministic, right? So even
right.
with whatever randomization, there's this file that gets written out, and so if you speed run Doom, you can replay at any place that Doom's been ported. So there's some really interesting properties about how Doom works, and if you check out this article, which will be in the notes for the show, it's just fascinating, some of the underpinnings of how it can work, and the fact that you could actually adapt this to, would you call this a layer two on
Y-
Cardano? Is that what this is?
yeah, I would say it probably is, because it
Because
it can
that's
be
like
run.
partner chains or side chains or whatever that is,
Yeah,
right? The
so those are
friend
a little.
chains. Yeah.
Well, no, those are a little bit different. So, and we can talk about those too at some point in time. And but no, this is actually what I would probably call a layer two solution more than anything. But these things exist. You can run Hydra nodes, and so the idea is that we get thousands of people running these Hydra nodes, where you can have local transaction state, which then gets written to the Cardano blockchain at some point in time asynchronously. Well, you could have thousands and thousands and thousands of transactions per second, right? Um, and it allows you, and I mean, when you compare this, because Bitcoin has this thing called the Lightning Network, and Lightning is very, very similar to this what Hydra nodes are, but
Yeah,
Hydra nodes,
that's like state channels or payment channels. That
yeah,
this is this tech that is being applied to a lot of different coin set models. I actually kind of like that idea of coin set. I think that one was somewhat popularized by Chia, and I think it's maybe a little bit more understandable by the average person than UTXO. UTXO, I understand, what that acronym is supposed to be, but it's a little, I think, harder to understand what that is. I think if you call it a coin, sometimes that may be a little easier to understand. But anyway, these payment channels are these state channels which have been used on Bitcoin quite famously and on Cardano, and it was soon coming to Chia. This is very similar type of tech where you have a coin spend, you trap something, and then now you're able to say, well, everything that's involved in this other layer, will be reconciled back to the chain at some point.
right. Yeah, I mean, it's like I say, it's not a new concept, it's not a new model. Um, the only thing I think about when you say coin, right? So you say coin set and stuff like that. So I don't know if you've heard of Midnight, but Midnight is a new sort of, and if I'm talking about what I'm actually developing on and working on, it's this. So if you think about a UTXO, and Midnight is a UTXO, but what it can do is it can react on something that exists in private space on somebody's computer, somebody's, it could be in somebody's wallet, it could be just a like a session token in somebody's private space. And so what that allows you to do is to execute a smart contract and a zero knowledge proof based on state, as opposed to, whether some amount of coin exists in a wallet or something like that. So I agree, Grant, about the trying to tell people or trying to describe to people what the advantages or disadvantages of any of this stuff. It can get difficult. I that I can understand very deeply. You know, how do we describe this stuff to people? I mean, what? Why does this matter? you know, so that's always difficult. But
Yeah, and I think it kind of comes down to simplify it or to make it as understandable as possible. I'll zoom up on this if I could actually do this correctly here. It's like trying to get back to the right size. It's thinking about it like this, where you have this transactional nature of cash versus somebody who's keeping track of something. And so on the account model, you've got some smart contract, and that smart contract, you go and you look at it, and the balances that are there tell you what you've got. Versus the UTXO model, if you want to get to how much do I have, you have to rifle through all of your bills in your wallet. And you have to say, well, I've got 100, a 50, a 10, and five, and two ones. And so you count it up, and you think about it more like coins or cash. Like this is like elementary school, and you learned what quarters and dimes and nickels were, and how they interacted with the world, and how you make change. This is what the UTXO model really models. And then this other one is you go to some centralized institution, you say, how much money do I have on deposit? And it's not that the account model necessarily operates like a bank, but it's a way to think about it, because the bank tells you how much you've got, and you really don't have a sense of what your coins are. And even some of the wallets, quote unquote, that exist out there try to abstract away from really letting you reason about what your coins are. And I think that that's always been a bit of a failing in the world of crypto. Is I see Bitcoin wallets do this pretty ubiquitously, and I see a lot of Chia wallets do this, where they'll hide your UTXOs from you. And what's tended to happen in the Bitcoin world, since they don't have covenants, is that you'll have errant spending of certain UTXOs that they didn't want to spend, because they can't guarantee the provenance and what a coin is supposed to be if you have some special property to it. So like I think that this is a way to think about it, and it's one way that Cardano is different than a lot of the really popular chains out there. Like say, it's different from Solana and different from Ethereum. So it's one of those UTXO models, and you have to think a little bit different about how you program with it. But ultimately, these things are decentralized, and I think we were talking about Cardano. It's a proof of stake chain. It's one of the first proof of stake chains, if I'm recalling that correctly, right?
I think it might be. You know, this sort of thing segues into a whole bunch of different like lines of conversation. You know, so I think about um, this thing that, you know, I don't know how other people call it or talk about it, but this thing called nativity, where um, uh, the account model and like ETH and even all the layer twos that exist on ETH, primarily they use the tokens uh, are really just smart contracts. So when you talk about an ERC20 token, I mean, what you're talking about is a smart contract, a certain amount of stuff that's sort of locked into, you know, the smart contract. But Cardano has, even though there are specialized tokens that have the same sort of thing, they most of the tokens are and you know ADA itself are native. So in other words, they're not smart contracts, right? So this sort of lends itself to this visibility, um, like you're talking about, Grant, of the UTXO model, right? Um, and so to me, I think that's like a huge advantage over like ETH or you know something like that. I don't know. This stuff. So you know, and then you go back to the question of how do we communicate why that matters? You know, I don't know. I haven't found a great answer other than what you're talking about. I think the approach that you were mentioning about how it makes how the visibility of your token and what value you actually hold is a really incredible sort of advantage um, to some of the things that Cardano gives us, right? Um, you know, it's also a good way. I mean, I can't imagine the craziness of programming the like for example ETH when um, you know you have to worry about the two spending problem where you might have you know like in the world of that I came from. So we have this idea where, you know, you might get two processes or three processes that, for example, try to write to the same block of code, right? So there has to be some mechanism to prevent, you know, prevent one block or prevent one process from overriding another process, right? And so it's this, you know, there has to be some way. And so I, I think that's what the EVM is supposed to do in ETH, right? And so I don't know, you get into all these crazy sort of programming paradigms that sort of leave your mind going, what? I don't know. It just to me, it's a little bit. It as crazy as Haskell is, and um, one of the reasons that Haskell was was brought into this thing at the very beginning was because you have that's one of the other advantages of Cardano is that I thought and I still believe it to be true and I think the evidence is very clear at this point, but Cardano is a very scientific approach. So if you go and you can look up all the papers. There's just you know I don't know what they said is 300 scientific papers, and it's mostly just math. And so this is what Haskell was good at. Haskell was really good at you know taking that math and turning it into code. I think that's the primary reason they did it was for that particular purpose because it's very you know lambda calculus. It's based on lambda calculus. It has lazy execution and curried functions where you can you know basically delay um, and it does this by default where it basically delays you know the output of something if you know it may have one um,
Oh, I don't know if we lost you for a second, but I was going
oh
to try and jump in anyway. But
yeah
yeah, so Haskell being a functional programming language and the parallels with how chia works, and even with what Bitcoin is thinking about how smart contracts should be done. These are stark contrast to the way that some of the other blockchains work when they have these imperative programming models. And when you think about like what's important in a smart contract, a functional programming language is a there's a really strong case for why that is the preferred way of doing it. And so you've got these smart contracts that are being implemented on Bitcoin, on Chia, and also on Cardano, and they're being done in these functional programming languages. It really is, in my opinion, the right way to do this. It's harder for developers to wrap their head around, but it leads towards more correctness. And when you're thinking about money and immutability, you have one good chance to get it right. And so having a language that has the ability to have a stronger thought process around how you can guarantee correctness, how you can do proofs that it's correct from a mathematical sense, it's much easier to do that with a functional programming language that doesn't have side effects, that doesn't have state. And so when we talk about things like currying in and all this, these are aspects of functional programming languages that are super important. And so for people that are coming at Cardano and sort of just wrapping their head around it, that may be coming from the world of Chia or coming from the world of Bitcoin, there's a lot of similarities in the way that Cardano is thinking about it. And I was impressed with some of the things that you're talking about with how much academic work has been done in the world of Cardano to try to arrive at, well, what is the right way to do this, or how should blockchains be done to achieve certain end goals. So yeah, Haskell, functional programming language, coinset model. These are the underpinnings of Cardano. In the world of Cardano, though, you guys are moving towards something new that's happening, though, right? So there's a hard fork that's going on. Can you tell us a little bit about what's happening in the current state? So what is this hard fork and why is it happening?
Yeah, so the hard fork is designed to bring in what what can I can only describe as a constitutional government, right? So
It's a community takeover, right? So
yeah,
there's some
exactly.
keys that are being burned, like the Genesis
Right,
keys.
the Genesis key. So at the beginning, Cardano, well, even as of this moment, right now in time, there's three organizations that hold the Genesis keys. They are, IOHK, which is Charles's company, the Cardano Foundation, and then Emergo, right? Um, but these Genesis keys are going to be burned next week. So once the actual Chang Hard Fork takes place, the Genesis keys will stop working. So in other words, the three entities will not have control over anything in the the uh, uh, the Cardano blockchain. They won't be able to do anything. So every change, every sort of decision we make on where to, spend the money from the treasury and stuff like that, are going to be defined and distributed by the community, right? So they'll come from votes and stuff like that. And um, uh, in the world of Cardano, they call this SIP 1694, and it's been bandied about and talked about for a very long time. Um, and they have what they call a minimum viable constitution that they are going to put into place in a constitutional convention. I mean, no, this sounds like early United States, and I think honestly, if I were a political science sort of person, I would actually um, I would actually study this, right? So there's a constitutional committee that's happening in Buenos Aires in Argentina in December. And so people from all over the world are going to get together in Buenos Aires, and they're going to ratify a constitution. And it's a minimum viable constitution, so it doesn't mean it's not going to change. So there's going to be some changes to it and stuff like that. And it is going to be, it's going to be really interesting. First off, there's a the I think the primary things that the Constitution is going to define, for example, are like what are some of the the parameters that the Cardano is going to, utilize. Like what is the best number of stake pools? How big should the blocks be? Stuff like that. But one of the other things about Cardano is that for all these transactions that you see, um, and some people question the TPS sort of thing of Cardano, but all of these transactions, for every one of them, there's a tiny little bit of coin of ADA that goes into this thing. It's a treasury, right? So right, and the whole purpose of the treasury, which um, is to provide funding for projects to you know help the Cardano blockchain grow through projects without having VCs so much. Venture capitalists have done a number sometimes on chains and on the viability of them and on the respect of them and stuff like that, because they just want to get their money out of it. And so the idea is, and I think it's a good one, I mean, I personally think it's a great one, is that we have this sort of, you can call it a tax, and it probably is, it's probably a tax. But all this stuff goes to building good things on Cardano, right? um,
And so
and
this is part of what's going to happen at the Constitutional Convention is you're actually going to appoint a treasurer for the chain, or everything's going to get voted on by voters.
well, yeah, so there are these things called delegate or DREPs. They call them decentralized representatives, and then you have stake pool so it's going to be like a tripartisan sort of thing. Just I guess some ways like the United States, um, where you have the DREPs, you have the the stake pool operators, and then you have the community. And the DREPs are sort of this thing that, and the stake pool operators sort of have the ability. I mean, to make a long story short, people can delegate their voting power to a DREP, and then the DREP is actually does the vote. And it votes on how to spend the money, really. I mean, how to what are the best sort of what is the best way to affect some change on the Cardano blockchain. Essentially, when I think about it, it's really just a way for people who can sometimes vociferously disagree with stuff, right? So in other words, you can have extremely uh, heated conversations about things, and you can discuss things in a heated way. But in the end, once the vote comes, there's nothing more you can say about it. It just happens. A lot of this stuff will get executed with smart contracts and stuff. So you may not like the outcome, but it's a way to get stuff done now. Um,
So
it's
how
not.
so how is the voting actually going to happen? Is it based on who's got the most Cardano? Is that
Well,
the
so
basis of it?
yeah, I'm not going to say this is perfect, because I've always questioned this thing called one ADA one vote, right? Because what it means is that some people who hold more ADA than others will have more voting power, right? And so you have this ability to affect things. You know, it's I sort of think of it like like lobbyists in Congress, in our Congress, right? I don't like it, and I think that's a problem with it, because it sort of leads to this old oligarchical bullshit that we've always had, where some big companies or some super rich person sort of decides that they want something done, and so all they have to do is pay up a whole bunch of money and they can get it done, right? So that is my problem with this whole thing. The other problem I have with it is that it's sort of self-indulgent, right? It's a lot of it's a lot of people doing a lot of things, um, and I don't know. It just seems a little bit. It's like an organization that sort of uh, whose purpose is to maintain itself. You probably, um, I don't know. I think it's got its problems, and the alternative though is this thing called the alternative is KYC, right? So KYC is one of these crazy things, and we should not bring KYC as it is because these are open protocols, but we do have to, I think, get to the point of using other tools. Like the one I'm working on is Midnight. Midnight will give us an ability to have one ADA, one vote, uh, with or you know to have to avoid one ADA, one vote is to have people who are actually people, you know, have the same sort of voting power. So one person, one vote. Because you can do KYC without KYC. So I just say KYC. It doesn't
So
equal
does that mean
KYC.
there's some kind of a digital identity project that's happening on Cardano? Is that what Midnight is?
Well, yeah, it's sort of that. Charles calls it an authentication authorization regime, right? So yes, that's true. So you can it uses zero knowledge proofs in the front end. So what you can do is you can have, you know, like let's say you wanted to vote in a wallet or something. So I think this is a really good solution for things like generalized voting systems we've been talking about for some time, that our governments can use and stuff like that. But it's really a way um, to use a zero knowledge proof in such a way that you can prove that you have the rights to something without actually showing anything more about you, right? So it's like the classic one is, hey, prove you're 20, prove you can drink alcohol, right? So if you can have a zero knowledge proof where you can show that you're 21 or legally able to drink alcohol without actually showing your driver's license, without actually showing the whole thing, right? So your address or whatever it is, all you have to do is show one little bit of information that you're 21, right? So I think a combination of tools that, I mean, Cardano's not perfect, just like everything is not perfect, but I really do think this the way that this is all going down with the Cardano convention and the ratification of a minimum viable constitution down in Argentina, um, and then yeah, I think this stuff is fantastic, and it's certainly worth studying. And I think it's going to bring a lot of really cool things. It's going to give us this ability to do a lot of cool things that we wouldn't otherwise be able to do. And there's no other chain like it. There's nothing like it. It's an actual government that is responsible for controlling the parameters, uh, and controlling the money. Just recently there was a situation where there was this group of people. I think they were called 3 UTXO, and so it was just a group of people who asked uh, Catalyst, which is Catalyst was the sort of group that was responsible for distributing the money before 1694 comes into place. And as of right now, they're still the people, but they're not distributing any money. And so all this will be handed over to the community as well. But so they asked the Catalyst, because they made a Catalyst proposal and it was pretty bad, but they did it. Hey, give us $200 million so that we can, or 200 million ADA or something like that, which is the equivalent now of about, I don't know, 90 million bucks or some such thing like that. Give us all this ADA so that we can do some really great projects, and we can do some really good things, and we can serve like a VC and stuff like that. It's like, no. But so there's still going to be people trying to game the system. I think it's not going to be perfect, but i don't think I don't think, especially right now, that the idea is to make things perfect, because there's no perfect system.
So,
But the idea,
but this is
yeah.
one of the biggest experiments in decentralized governance that's ever happened, right? I don't really know of any other chains that have wholesale handed over the governance of a chain or even have any kind of governance of a chain other than I guess, what Bitcoin has with respect to you're voting with your feet. Either you accept the hard forks, you accept the new pieces of software, or you
Yeah.
don't. And if you don't
Right.
accept it, then you've got chain splits. So this is like a way to ensure conformance to what the Cardano blockchain should be through a mechanism that everybody's saying, well, this is what this hard fork is about. It's about a community takeover. It's
Yeah.
about allowing for the governance of the chain to be done. And so initially, it's going to be done with one ADA, one vote, which means the more ADA you've got, the more influence you've got over the process. But maybe if midnight takes off, or if there's some thought that the ADA voters say, no, we should be doing it this other way, then there's actually a mechanism to go about getting to these kinds of answers.
Yeah, 100% that's right. You know, it is it is yeah, there's nothing else like it. And I think about it from the perspective of, like, let's say you are Charles Hoskinson and you own, I mean, basically you own the chain, you're like the philosopher king of it all. You're like, you have the keys to do almost anything you want. I mean, what would it take for you as a person to, and I'm not saying he doesn't have an ego, because he certainly does, but he gave it away. So he's giving all this away to us. To me, that's like, whoa, you know, whoa. It's unique. It's unique in the world. I mean, even before blockchains were conceived, um, you know, uh, and I think at the beginning, this is kind of what Bitcoin was kind of designed to do. Um, is you know is so that no single person can own it. No single person or a small group of people can own it, right? So ultimately, we call this, the Nakamoto coefficient, or something like that, right? And Bitcoin is the model for that sort of stuff, but that is part of the whole reason for what's going on, is so that we can sort of duplicate that sort of model, because the proof of work mechanism in and of itself actually allows, for example, clients, nodes, miners, to come in and leave, to have different versions to, if their network goes down, then it's that's one of the primary advantages of a proof of work system. And proof of stake doesn't quite have those advantages. And so, you know um, by giving it to the community, and also by providing additional protocol support. Like, there's this thing that's in testnet right now, and so soon after the Chang Hard Fork happens, there's going to be another major update that allows this, what's called Ouroboros Genesis, which sort of gives you the same sort of advantage of a proof of stake or a proof of work system into a proof of stake system. So where where nodes can come and go, where their network can be down, and uh, I don't know, it all has to do with this longest chain, and what is the longest chain and stuff like that. But
And some of that really comes into play because you don't have a proof of work system, right?
correct, that
Yeah,
is correct,
because
right?
there's no ability to vote with your feet here. Like
Yeah,
the way that the consensus mechanism works here, it's not through proving that you've done a certain amount of work to produce the next block, but rather that there's this proof of stake mechanism. And when you've got that, you don't have this ability to vote with your feet. So I think what this is
correct,
somewhat been out of necessity that Cardano needs to deal with this unless they want to continuously have their benevolent dictator, philosopher king, in control of everything. And
right.
this is a way to effectuate this takeover.
Yeah, correct. I again, I am just completely blown. I mean, look, I like this guy. I think he's a great guy, Charles. I think he's brilliant. I think I listen to him. He's one of the few people I know of. So, you listen to him like 7 years ago. He has this whiteboard session, and he says this, I'm going to do this and this, I'm going to do, this. There's very few people in life now. There's this my daughter used to dance Irish dance, and there's this guy who came from Ireland, and he bought this, which was an old firehouse. And I remember at the beginning when he bought this old firehouse, I'll get to why this is related. But he bought this old firehouse, and I, I thought to myself, what can anyone make of this? He wanted to have a dance school, right? So, but he had a vision, and he executed on it, and he executed it over a very long period of time. So it took him like 5 years to change this old firehouse into this dance school. And in Minneapolis, St. Paul, it's a huge thing. And you go to this place, and it's called the Celtic Junction, and you go there. So I just realized that was an old firehouse, and he and just a few other people changed this thing from an old firehouse into this really great sort of thing. Now Charles did, in my opinion, there's very few people. He sort of does the same thing over a long period of time. He's able to execute on a vision he's had, right? So it's been imperfect, of course. Like some things didn't work, some things worked better than they thought they might. It's imperfect, but the vision that he had, he's executed on it. He's followed through, and now, as his vision was, he's giving it away. Um, and and some people can say, oh, maybe that, when you think about what the SEC has been doing to people, to blockchains and stuff like that, trying to apply the Howey test and everything like that, it's like, you know um, I think some people maybe think it's a strategy, and it certainly could be part of it, but I just think the guy's, uh, I think he's like a modern day Thomas Jefferson. I really do. And so a lot of people are going to scoff at that. I get it, but I think the guy's great.
I agree. I've followed him for many years, and I think that I love politics, if not political science, but I love politics, and I look at blockchains as even the internet and computers as a recreation of reality that we have, and blockchains in are so much a recreation of concepts of the real world. The mining aspect of Bitcoin was emulating the discovery of gold. Ethereum, in some ways, emulating the a central bank, and now at this third wave, emulating and an understanding of a monetary system that's based on taxes. Like I'm not repulsed by that understanding. I think that realizing that ADA goes in a circle, that money goes in a circle, is very important to making an ecosystem that is recursive on itself and yet continues to be generative. So, but one thing that I think about as you bring up, your concerns of one ADA, one vote is also the warnings against democracy that that the Greeks gave us, that Plato gave us, that Socrates gave us. The propensity of democracy to devolve into sort of banal questions and constant bickering. And we talk here on the show a lot about one axe I constantly grind is that our democracy should be meted out in our judicial system, not our legislative system. Is there some sort, and you also mentioned that Charles was very intentional in his design and in sort of the three or the trilateral system that we had some ways in our checks and balances of the American government. Is there, say, a judicial system that checks the legislative votes as to what happens with ADA once this chain fork is invoked?
Yeah.
What would be analogous to that, the judicial system?
Well, so it becomes not a it becomes not the politics of actually voting for a person, right? So what I think about is that it sort of becomes more of a referential system, right? So we vote on issues, we vote on, whether this project is, a reasonable project and whether we should fund it or not, stuff like that. Um,
That's more like what the power of Congress, I think, was traditionally supposed to be, where it had the power of the purse and it said, this is things that the government should be participating in. And I think you've even got some form of like rudimentary taxation on Cardano,
yeah,
right? For
yeah, that's the fund that I was talking about. Yeah, absolutely, it is, and like I said, you can call it a tax, and that's exactly how I think of it too. I think it's, like I say, a referential system. And I think about what would happen if, for example, our government were run on DAOs, right? So I love this concept of DAOs, where you might have a politician who represents issues, and they wouldn't really be a politician; they'd be an issue representative, right? So they represent issues, and then we, as people, um, will vote on whether we think this thing should be implemented or not. And then, I could see all kinds of wonderful and incredible potential political sort of advantages to that sort of thing, right? So people themselves become kind of unimportant. So in other words, the charismatic sort of leader. Now you can have charismatic leaders who support issues. I kind of don't see anything wrong with that. There's always going to people who say, "Oh, we should do this, we should do that, we should do this," but they have no more power to affect the voting capability. This is why they have no more power to affect, you know, um, whether the issue will be implemented based on the money that they have, based on how much they own. Now, they can be more right than others. I don't see a problem with that, obviously, if the
I,
issues
I,
are good.
I I do kind of see the parallel here, and at least
Yeah,
what was set up in the early part of how the U.S. government was formulated. You had this idea that you had to be a landowner, and so you've got something similar in ADA that you have to be an ADA owner,
yeah,
right? And then you've got this idea that if you have stake in the system, right, like where people who had land in the United States, they're the ones who had the ability to participate in government. So I see a lot of parallels in the way you're describing things, forms of taxation, forms of representation, the power of the purse. That it seems very interesting from a political science perspective that this is being effectuated on a blockchain to form some sort of governance.
yeah. I agree. I mean, that's kind of what I was saying earlier. Is that if I were a political science student, or if I were studying governments, I mean, I would really get in and start studying these things, as an objective observer, right? Because there's going to be mistakes, there's going to be things we can make better, there's going to be changes, but I think this is the basis for. I don't know. I mean, I'm pretty positive about this. I think it's kind of the basis for all kinds of you know wonderful things to happen. you
I
know
agree. As I think about the structure of it too, I think about the marketplace, and also, Ethereum has had problems with the creation of assets that are listed on that blockchain, but how do you pass it around? There's a centralized aspect in the exchanges, and Chia has something called offer files that have, like, I sometimes say, a lot of blockchains we think of as a hub, but Chia seems to me in some ways as a chain where the gears are pointed out. What's the marketplace like on Cardano? Are there centralized exchanges, or are assets able to be passed around in a decentralized manner? Can
well,
you?
yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the best things about Cardano is this thing called liquid staking. So when we talk about total value locked and stuff like that in Ethereum, we're talking about locking a lot of ETH into smart contracts for staking purposes, and Lido becomes like this centralized sort of thing that holds a lot of ETH, right? But with Cardano, you can stake things to a stake pool, and you leave it there, and or it's, leaving is not even the right word. So you stake it, and so the protocol has kind of this heartbeat, and it happens every five days. It's called an epoch. Um, and if you stake it during one, I think it takes 2 epochs for your stake to be registered. But once it gets registered, then you can have the advantage of that stake, right? Where you get rewards and stuff. Think of it like interest. But then what you can take that and sort of just do anything you want with it. You can spend it. It's not locked in a smart contract. It's yours, right? You can do anything with it. You lose the advantage of, putting it, of staking it to a stake pool where you get rewards or after. I want to say again, it's 2 epochs or something like that. If you were to take it out in the middle of an epoch or something like that, but still you can do it, right? So it's liquid. So all this liquidity of staking to a stake pool is still there. It's not locked. You can use it for whatever purposes you want. So to me, from a market perspective, the ability to do that is just a huge thing. But yeah, so there's centralized exchanges, just like any other sort of you know thing. Um, I kind of not up on centralized exchanges in the sense that I want us to get to a point where we're spending things directly between decentralized exchanges. Like the Coinbases are fine, but I want us to be able to get to the point where we don't need centralized exchanges for off ramps. So on ramps and off ramps to fiat are the primary reasons for centralized exchanges. But if we could have, and there's a few stable coin options now in Cardano. I mean, we talked for some time about how we could get like Circle to put its stable coin and Tether, but because there's things like clawbacks and stuff like that, Cardano is, I don't know. I don't think we're ever going to have like Circle. I don't know, but there's a few like USDM, which is a stable coin. Plus, there's JED, which is a over collateralized stable coin. I think there's a lot of options. So, um, we don't have the market cap of an ETH, but I don't know if our technology is anything. If Cardano's technology is worth anything to an investor, for example, I have to say that Cardano is hugely undervalued. It's just my opinion. I'm not a financial guy. I just,
Well, and market cap's one thing, but another thing I keep an eye on is the amount of communities, the amount of I don't know, people devoted to a chain. It seems that Cardano, I don't know how large the community is, but they certainly are devoted. Has the community of Cardano? I've stopped actually paying as much attention in, say, like the last year, but has the interest and the communities of is Cardano growing in that regard, or is it holding steady or diminishing? Where's it?
well, you can say what you want about X, Twitter, whether it's losing its market, but anytime anyone does a poll, right? Just go and look up some of these polls. Like anytime anybody does a poll on on X where it compares, oh, would you hold ETH? Would you hold, this other token, Bitcoin? Would you hold this or that? And if Cardano always wins, hands down, it always wins. So, and I always is maybe not the right word, depending on how the question is framed sometimes. But when Cardano's included in the list of even these major things, so I would say that's a good indication that the community is strong and growing, and I believe it to be true. And It it I don't know. I just think it's we're just at the beginning of this whole sort of thing, and I don't know. I'm excited by it. I think the community is growing. Yes.
Do you think Elon is a secret Cardano maxi?
No,
He's,
he's like
he's
he's
touting
like
Doge while he's filling his bags. Is that what's
what
happening?
is it? What is it? Dogecoin? I don't even know what he holds, but yeah, I think he's just filling his bags. That's my opinion. It's like I wouldn't say pump and dump, but he's dumping enough. He pumps it up and then he dumps enough to make I don't know how many millions, and then like I don't know. No, I think he probably holds some Cardano, some ADA, but I don't know. Charles has offered to do some work for him. Um, for the platform. That's the other thing. I mean, he gives resources to these other companies, right? So Charles is willing to fix some problem on X with his own developers, right? And so Charles is paying their salaries. He's paying them. To me, I find that that's so unusual. There's nothing like it. But that's just my opinion too. I mean, it's a fact that he does this, but
And I don't know if we're sticking at an hour today or if we want to go on further, but either way, a question about midnight. You mentioned midnight earlier, and I think
mhm.
that as some sort of privacy sidechain aspect to a blockchain is fundamental uh, for courting private businesses or businesses that are going that probably believe in some sort of secret that they're holding for their their secret sauce for market dominance or what have you.
Yep.
Is is the where is midnight? Is it in testing stage? Is it
It's yeah, it's in DevNet right now, right? And
Do I have the right thing on the screen? Midnight Network, is this
yeah,
right?
that's it. Yep, unlocking the widespread adoption of the decentralized web. So, people talk about bridging this gap between Web 2 and Web 3, and I think it's mostly just hypey crap. What does that even mean? But when I think about what to me, Web3 has a certain definitions. And so this product, Midnight, is really a way, I mean, really a way to bridge this gap between Web 2 and Web 3. And so that's how I'm seeing it. And that's sort of where my development lies. I can include, like right now, I'm just working on an app, and I'm just sitting here in Node.js, and I've implemented a smart contract that I've basically made an interface to Angular. I typically use Angular for this stuff, and I can run a smart contract in just a regular and zero knowledge proofs and just a regular sort of website, based on state of something. In my case, I use OpenOAuth tokens. Uh, I use you know what are typically called decentralized, uh, self-sovereign digital IDs, that sort of thing. And that's one other thing Charles did was he gave this thing called a teleprism to the Hyperledger institution or the Hyperledger group. So now there's this product on Hyperledger called Hyperledger Identitas. And basically, it's a way to have verified credentials. So, I mean, to me, that's the biggest thing of being able to use verified credentials. Is because of the relationship that we have with governments and people that may say just because you can show that you know show, for example, on your phone or whatever it is that you have this credential. um, it doesn't mean that the government is going to say that this is a valid credential, right? So the biggest work any of us have to do for this, to have things like decentralized self-sovereign IDs with verified credentials, is we have to have this relationship with the people who are who are the verifiers, right? So who will say that, this is a valid credential, you know? And so that's the big thing. That's the hard part. My goal is to take verified credentials and non-verifiable but related information, and then have have the front end application just execute zero knowledge proofs and smart contracts on it, right? So when I talk about state, so I think it's an incredible thing, and like I say, when I go back to thinking about what I believe Web 2 and Web 3 are, I really think it does bridge the gap, even though that sort of moniker, when you say bridge the gap between Web 2 and Web 3, people have been using it forever and ever. And it's just like decentralization. When people have, this thought about what decentralization is, they say, oh, I'm decentralized, I'm decentralized, I'm decentralized. But it doesn't mean anything, because up until recently, there hasn't been objective information about it. And so, that's, I'm up on this thing called the Edinburgh Decentralization Index. And it really does actually you know, uh, give some objective information about decentralization. If we ever want to have a conference, I know we don't have uh, time today, but at some point in time, I would like to sort of add that sort of Edinburgh Decentralization Index as a discussion topic at some point in time. So maybe we can do this again, sometime. I would appreciate that.
Absolutely. And I would love to get into, I think you're 100% right about these words we throw around, Web 2, Web 3. A lot of it has to do with the attention market and the way that information is monetized in the current form, and the way that abuses cloud and centralized data storage. And so a lot of what we're aiming at doing is in a way freeing ourselves from the dopamine market that gets tossed our way in exchange for art.
Just to round out this show, because I think we probably will have to wrap it here. But I agree, Rob. I would love to talk a bit more. I think we've scratched the surface on a few topics, and so it might be fun to break this into 3 parts or something. Maybe we could focus on decentralized identity and verifiable credentials. I know that there's been work that's been done on Cardano at midnight that you've told us about, and then we've got some stuff that's been cooking over on the Chia side of things. And I believe that there's been some work that was done with Circle that they were trying to do some stuff. I think they've actually abandoned it. They said that they couldn't figure out how to make it work
Right.
correctly. So there's some interesting stuff in the landscape of decentralized identity, and I'd love to get a bit deeper in there. But just to round out the show today, since you mentioned it, on the decentralization index, have I got the right thing on the screen right now?
Yeah, it's the right thing. And if you go to the dashboard, and there's 2 parts to it.
Wait a minute. Oh, there, I see a dashboard.
The
Got it.
dashboard, and there's really 2 parts. So there's tokenomics, which, if you think about that, I mean, Cardano loses in the tokenomics part because it just doesn't have the market share of like an ETH or something like that. But if you go to the
I'll look at this, and Chia's not even listed, of course.
well, I know. So I'll bet.
When you say, like Cardano doesn't get listed on certain things, or if it does get
No,
listed,
I know,
Chia's
you're
not
right.
even here.
However, I would bet $100 that if you talk to these people, if you talk to the Edinburgh Decentralization Index, they would be happy, as long as there's some objective way for them to pull the information from the blocks and stuff. They would be happy to include it. I'm quite sure they would.
Ooh, if you've got a contact, we'd love to do that. I think we could easily point some of our friends in the Chia community at that and see if we can't get this listed.
Or, we could maybe one of us, I mean, not one of us, but we could even do it. So all the code to do this, to get this data is in, it's you can get it from here, from Edinburgh Decentralized, and it's just Python. And it just gets the information from the blocks and stuff. So maybe we can, but I'll see what I can do about finding a contact at EDI, and it would be nice to include more chains here than just these. That would be wonderful.
Yeah, I
So,
know for sure that there's somebody in the community that could do this, because
yeah.
there's the guy that put this site together. I believe this on X. He calls himself the slowest time lord, which is kind of funny because he actually has the fastest time lord now, so he might have to change his name. But he's been calculating this kind of stuff, and so you can see that they've done something similar where they've tried to, compare over time. And there was a period of time where Chia was just ripping from a Nakamoto
Yeah.
coefficient. I mean, if you
Yeah.
see this, it was like
Yeah.
way up at like 140, but then Chia's had its own difficulties in like its consensus mechanism and how things work. And so the Nakamoto coefficient significantly dropped, and there's been some discussions within the Chia community about how to correct this. But I think as far as getting them listed on that thing, it should be pretty straightforward because all these metrics and data are already available. So I think it's
Right.
just a matter of getting it into the right spot.
Yeah, so I'll reach out to them and see if we could find a contact to include that information in the EDI. So that'd be wonderful.
All right. Well, let's. I've loved the conversation today, Rob. This has been super fun getting to know a little bit more about Cardano and stuff you're working on. I would love to have a focused discussion on decentralized identity, particularly just because this one's been front and center with a lot of work that's been done in different blockchains. And so trying to understand your experiences with it and where you think it might go, I think it's a fascinating topic. I think people are scared of it, and I don't think they should be scared of, this idea
Well,
of decentralized identity, because if it's done correctly, it can actually be better than the stuff that we're doing now. Because
yeah,
right now we're sort of splaying our credentials everywhere and into very untrustworthy hands, and that
exactly.
has led to all these breaches and stuff that's happened. And so there's actually an opportunity, I think, to do it better.
The 100% there's an opportunity. And I'll just say this, and then I can just shut up about it. But the distinction between a government issued digital ID, right, and a decentralized self-sovereign digital ID, um, you know, they're like completely different. They're night and day. And so the definitions of things are extremely important. What can be done to us, what can't be done to us, what sort of social engineering can be applied to us, or what it can't, what it might be impossible to do, stuff like that, right? So that is the very crux of what governments are going to use. And I mean, I am kind of a libertarian, but what governments are going to use to control our behavior, and they always do it. I mean, we have the example of China, right? And so we have to be very careful about what the definitions are, and so that's what I really stress with this sort of stuff. So
Grant, we finally found a libertarian in the world of crypto.
No, come on. There's only one. Rob's the only one. All right. Well, with that, Rob, thanks for joining us today. This has been a great discussion about Cardano, and we will queue up some stuff in the future to talk a bit more about some of the topics that we touched briefly on today. But let's definitely plan for a deep dive on decentralized identity. And yeah, we'll see you soon.
beautiful. Thanks, people. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate the conversation.